Kia ora tatau, and welcome back to Tech Week TV and the theme of climate and sustainable tech. For this session, our topic is accelerating Aotearoa's net zero emission target. And this is organized and brought together by the New Zealand IoT Technology Association community. Before we get started, perhaps maybe I just explain what IoT means. Now, I'm not an IoT expert, and every expert I speak to gives me a different definition of IoT. But for the purpose of this afternoon, let's define it as a collection of things that are connected to the internet and to each other, through which we can collect data and then use the data for a wide range of purposes. So let's go with that definition of IoT. And before we start the conversation on, well, what is the relevance of IoT when it comes to, net zero emissions target? Well, let's actually have a look at what the net zero emissions target actually mean. So perhaps Ilan, before, my apologies, I forgot to introduce our speakers today. With us today, this afternoon, Fraser Payne, who's a Director of Sales from the Aware Group. We have Ilan Oshri, Professor, University of Auckland Business School. Malcolm Fraser, Principal Architect and Data Governance and founding member of the I4 Institute. And last but not least, Steve Cooper, Digital Ventures Leader, Asia Pacific and Australia at Mott MacDonald. Welcome, gentlemen, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
To get started, can I please invite Ilan to maybe share with us what we understand as net zero targets?
Yeah, thanks, Mitchell. So we done research as part of the Center of Digital Enterprise on emissions and tech. So our focus is on the connection between sustainability and tech. When it comes to net zero, then predominantly we're looking at carbon emissions, obviously, and the way that they can be reduced. And there are different means of assessing that, as well as looking at the sources of the emission. Predominantly, we're focusing on Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3. When it comes to that, then in Scope 1, it means that this is what the enterprise is emitting. Scope 2 is usually utility and any suppliers within the utility and energy sector. And the Scope 3, which is a little bit more challenging, these are the targets that concern basically the supply chain as a whole. I'll just add, in terms of research, so we've done quite a lot of research by now on that. Any report that you will see nowadays is pointing out that it's very likely that about 1/3 of businesses that set up already their net zero targets are likely to miss it by 2050. So that's not so good news when it comes to what we are hoping, to achieve by 2050. But at the same time, we're shedding more light in terms of how we can accelerate the challenge of addressing net zero targets. And clearly, we're getting an indication that technology is probably where the solution would lie, and there should be basically more understanding of what in terms of technology. So going back to the IoTs and maybe expanding that, from our study, basically 3 technologies are instrumental to accelerating the objective of meeting basically net zero targets. One is the cloud, which is quite straightforward. And I think that anyone in the tech business understands the role of the cloud in improving basically the reporting as well as the actual reduction. The second one is data analytics, and we're going to hear more about data analytics quite soon. I'll leave it with the gentleman here to talk more about that. And obviously the IoTs that you just mentioned, that they are critical in order to achieve those integration of technologies into understanding how they address sustainability challenges often goes beyond just the net zero. The other thing that is not such a great news, and I've been talking about that for the last 12 months or so, New Zealand in our study is actually a lagger when it comes to combining technology and sustainability. So we did a study across Asia Pacific, and the results are that New Zealand as a whole still powerhouse in terms of technology, but there is lack of governance within New Zealand enterprises that bring together sustainability and technology. So I'll leave it at this point to explore those aspects, and I'm sure that in the conversation we'll hear more about that.
Thank you very much, Ilan. So perhaps with our other speakers, what are your thoughts around the importance of data and a bunch of related technologies when it comes to addressing our net zero targets? What are your views? Maybe Fraser, shall we start with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I think Ilan actually outlined exactly where those technologies intersect is where there's the most opportunity to see kind of an impact occur. One example that comes to mind is this company down in Dunedin called Tection, that they're the producers of an IoT microscope. So instead of a microscope in a lab where you would send your samples and you maybe wait 3 to 6 days for a result, you can analyze that sample on site. It takes an image and uses IoT or internet to transmit that image up to their lab for annotation, or in a more advanced step, they're potentially doing that analysis with AI. So reducing from 3 to 6 days down to 3 to 6 hours to have a person analyze that in a lab by transmitting the image, or instead using AI within 3 to 6 seconds, you can get that result back. The impact of this on sustainability can be really significant in agriculture, where the presence of parasites, for example, in sheep or cows, can increase the amount of methane or CO2 produced by those animals by up to 30%. And the current approach there is basically to what's called herd drenching, which is that you treat every single animal in the herd if any individuals within the herd are seen to have the presence of the parasite, but that leads to huge amounts of antibiotic resistance. And what they actually know is that over 80% of the parasites are held within 20% of the herd. So if you can be more precise and you can administer that treatment on site within 3 to 6 seconds of taking the sample, you don't need the vet to drive in and out. You can treat the specific animals with more precision. You can reduce the amount of antibiotic resistance occurring within the parasite species, and you can reduce CO2 by up to 30%. So you're seeing kind of a step change improvement in both the efficiency of treatment, the quality of the treatment, the negative effects to the animals are reduced, and the CO2 emissions are reduced. And it's really by bringing that intersection together of IoT, data analytics, and using the cloud compute to actually accelerate the analytics of the microscope images.
So what you're saying is actually it's not the devices themselves, and it's not just the data that they collect. It's actually combining a whole bunch of different things together, right? The devices, the data, technologies, and then applied, I guess, industry science of a certain problem domain.
It's finding the right problem to solve.
In order to kind of solve that problem with IoT technologies. Can I just go over to perhaps Steve? What are your thoughts and experience?
Well, it's the same theme, I think. You can't manage what you can't measure, and what you've just described is the ability to measure something that you perhaps weren't measuring before in a way that's fast in real time or close to real time, and then being able to solve the problem, like you said, to do something about it. The example I would cite is what we've been doing in the water sector at wastewater treatment plants. This is for Watercare, who's the city's, Auckland City, Tamaki Makaurau's water service provider. And so they're very worried about emissions. They've been trying to drive their emissions down. They're looking at Scope 3 a lot across their Capital Works program, but there's only so much stuff they can not build or build cleverly. And so the Scope 1 and 2 emissions are ones that relate to the operation of their plant. They need to use these IoT devices to be able to measure that. And then we can act on that. And there's some interesting emissions from these treatment plants. N2O, or nitrous oxide, is actually a very potent greenhouse gas, about 200 times that of CO2. And so these plants, often while they're treating our waste and removing the nutrients, which is a good thing, we want to make sure they're not creating another problem, which is releasing a whole lot of gas. And the ability to be able to monitor quickly, train models on how it works, and then be able to control these plants so they emit CO2 instead of N2O is really quite critical. Yeah. So there's a lot of work going on that, and there's collaboration around the globe in this field because there's a lot of waste being treated.
Absolutely. So I'm just kind of reflecting what I hear here is that across these two examples, we are talking about the ability to be really, really close to real time.
Yes.
But also be able to be very, very precise, very concise in terms of where we do things to solve problems, right?
Yeah.
Great. So Malcolm, what are your experiences? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think some of the keywords that are floating up so come together. So collaboration, data-informed decision-making, etc. I think one of the challenges we face around net zero, and you touched on it briefly, is that we're not applying technology in the right way or in the right process to be able to get the data across these systems. Because everything that we're talking about here, whether it be, parasite control on the farm or, wastewater treatment, etc., these are all systems. And of course, we know from history if we make the wrong decision on one part of the system, it can have a significant impact on another part of the system. So this idea of how do you govern data collaborations across these types of situations. And I'm not talking here from the perspective of how do you actually do the technology. I mean, there's great organisations like Aware Group and Auckland University have technologists on board. It's about how do you actually surface the data that these IoT devices are producing. So that's why at the IoT Alliance we're taking a themed approach now rather than just a general smart cities. We're actually talking about using a theme each year. And this year for 2023, of course, the theme is Infrastructure 4.0. And if you look at things like water infrastructure or power infrastructure or transport infrastructure, they're all systems. So what we're looking at is how do you govern these types of data collaborations? So you mentioned earlier the M1 Data Collaborative, which is a new thing just emerging in the last 2 or 3 weeks at the IoT Alliance. That's a project that's going to be looking at environmental data and supply chain data up in the Maharangi Harbour. So we've got oyster farmers. We've also got Warkworth town, or small city, I would say. That is one of the most intensely urbanisation, whatever
Urbanisation.
it is, right? Yeah. Lots of houses going up.
Yes,
lots of houses, lots of runoff, and of course runoff into the harbour affects when you can catch oysters, etc. Climate change has also got an impact. Rising water temperature will have an impact on spawning rates. So that's why the MI Data Collaborative. So far we've got people like Marine Science Department from Otago University. Massey University around agriculture strategy, etc. We'll be talking to Auckland Council, etc. But the whole idea is how to generate data off the IoT devices across that particular area and how that feeds into the supply chain and working this through. And look, this is not only a New Zealand problem; it's a global problem. We know that in decision making, boards of directors and governance professionals tend to rely on gut feel and experience rather than data. So we've actually got to change that mindset. So great that we've got devices that can produce the data, but how do we collaboratively work together across these systems to adapt to climate change and reduce carbon emission?
And if I can just add to that, there's a really good publication in the UK that they generated a few years ago called The Gemini Principles, and it talks about digital twins and how by using a set of common principles we can share data and build that collaboration on a kind of national scale.
Mm-hmm. And I want to. We've heard a lot about this concept of digital twins, and I guess to challenge that thinking, what we've tended to do with that conversation is, would it be great if we had a national digital twin, a digital twin of New Zealand? Well, we might get there, but we'll get there one value chain or one ecosystem at a time. If you look back, if we're talking about the environment. Right now, we have agencies that are producing policy around the environment and our reaction to climate change and net zero, etc. They've got no data.
Mm-hmm.
As you said, we're slow to actually apply these types of technologies to help it. So I would, digital twin of a supply chain, forestry or aquaculture. Yes, because then you have people who know the taxonomy, know the language, etc.
That's right.
Trying to do it from the top down out of Wellington.
Yeah, no, I don't think you can. I think the idea of the digital twin is you connect them all over time. Yeah. So you've got infrastructure's a system and then a system of systems at the highest level, and digital twins are kind of the same. We're each developing them, but we need to ensure that we can connect them so they all work together.
One of the biggest issues I see whenever we talk to any organisation about building a digital twin or a data platform is that their first question is, how do we build this, not does it exist already? So no one's actually looking to connect these systems. As a first step, you talk to the councils, if you talk to the regional bodies, the governance boards for transport or for ecology or whatever infrastructure it might be, the first question is always, how do we build it, not does it exist? And that's, they've got to swap that around for sure.
Yeah, well, the digital twin helped quite a few companies to realize the connection of where data comes from and the relevance for this data stream, basically, for what they're trying to achieve. We've seen that done by, for example, companies that are in shipping, that they're trying basically to optimize the vessel efficiency and travel across long distances. So it can be done well. I think that when you're getting into much bigger systems, I see the challenge in that, because I think partnership is along the way here that needs to be sorted out. And from studies that we have done, there is a great need to increase partnership when it comes to addressing how technology is becoming relevant for sustainability. So the major challenge is to understand what is it that you need in terms of knowledge that exists out there, and how this knowledge is actually helping you to solve the problem. There is a lot of generic knowledge out there, but what I've heard here in terms of examples, it actually shows that solutions lies within the context of the specific industry. So what we see is that a lot of providers are coming with the idea that we have one solution fits all. I think in technology and sustainability, that's not the way forward. We need to start thinking about the industry needs. Some industries have got a lot of issues when it comes to scope 2 and scope 1, but they have very little issues when it comes to scope 3. We need to unpack that first and then start thinking about solutions that are relevant for those industries. So there's a lot that sits also on the provider side that needs to be carefully addressed. It's not just about how the enterprise understand the governance issue.
So you're suggesting that we should actually be thinking about the why before we think about the technology?
Yes, there is a lot behind that.
What's the question we're trying to solve? And this goes back to data collaborations, or actually doing things with purpose. What's the purpose of actually, what are we trying to solve? Who do we need to bring in terms of the collaboration, and what data do they bring?
Yes.
I was reading a really interesting article a couple of days ago around this concept of data mesh. Everybody's going, oh, it's another data, but well, hang on. So if you look at data mesh, it talks about domains. So you might have a water domain or a forestry domain, etc. It talks about data products, which are directly lined up to, if that's the problem, what's the data product that meets that, and then all the technology falls from there. I thought that's just another variation on that digital twin, or just getting an understanding of the data that's going on from things to inform decision making.
Yes.
Absolutely. So what I'm hearing is that whilst IoT can be very effective at addressing specific problems, I guess broader kind of ecosystem type of problems need a more kind of collaborative approach, right? Whether or not it's kind of horizontal or vertical or diagonal in terms of domain, industry domain or problem domains, there's a strong case for collaborating in terms of using the data that you collect to solve that one problem, but then sharing it so that other problems can be addressed. So that's sharing data. And then also there's kind of a case for sharing technologies and being able to kind of bring together the relevant different types of data sets in order to inform a bigger picture kind of solution to a bigger picture kind of problem, right? And another thing I'm hearing is that the flow of data and data collection and the flow of data across a supply chain for every industry needs to be addressed first, so that we have visibility and understanding of the problem before we can kind of solve it. So technology is, in a way, a means to an end.
Technology is an enabler. It's helping us solve some of these problems. And collaboration, as you pointed out, is really key. A lot of the work we've been involved in is we've collaborated with multiple agencies, private and public sector, to solve the problem that we're looking to solve.
I think you were saying earlier you can only manage what you measure, and it's it's absolutely right. The IoT is only going to give you the observation, but you still need the decision and then the action. And if you're not taking action or making the wrong decision, the observation is useless. So the IoT is an enabler, but it's that lowest level of kind of enabling that framework to manage systems better.
Yeah.
And when it comes to reporting, then this is very important, because currently reporting is still more on the qualitative side rather than the quantitative side. If we were to to look at it as a holistic system, one part which has to be established is that we're moving from qualitative reporting to more quantitative reporting. Yeah. And this is where technology can be a good enabler.
Wonderful. So we're nearly time now, so I'm just going to ask one question and maybe get an answer from each of you. And give us one sentence as a recommendation to the general public who's watching this program right now, who are not necessarily tech people or sustainability experts, right? What can a person do to help advance the use of IoT to address sustainability problems? Do you want to start with Steve, perhaps?
What can a person do? I guess be willing to collaborate.
Great, thank you. Ilan?
Yeah, I will agree that it's all about partnership.
Great. And
I think there's a real opportunity for citizens to become scientists in the net zero conversation, which means bridging the gap between academia, government and industry.
and industry. Thank you, Malcolm. Fraser?
I think a lot of people could be asking more questions about why things are being done the way that they are, or how they could be done differently. And if more perspectives were kind of brought into the conversation about what's possible, we could potentially find new places to apply the technology.
Wonderful. So the key words I'm hearing is that learn, ask questions, collaborate, and put pressure on businesses and on government to move forward. Brilliant. Excellent. Well, thank you very much for your time and expert insight. We very much appreciate what we've been learning this afternoon about accelerating Aotearoa's net zero emissions target with IoT. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Come on.